Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining this overview webinar of Silicon Valley Clean Energy's Innovation On-Ramp program. Presenting today, we will have Amy Gotway-Bailey, the Director of Decarbonization and Grid Innovation at Silicon Valley Clean Energy, as well as myself, Brian Jones. I'm a project manager with the nonprofit organization Center for Sustainable Energy, and we work closely with Silicon Valley Clean Energy to implement the Innovation On-Ramp program. So very briefly, our agenda for the presentation today is going to last about 20 to 25 minutes, and then we wanted to leave the remainder of the hour to field questions or any comments from attendees and answer them to the best of our ability. So Amy's going to start by providing a brief overview of SVCE's decarbonization strategy and roadmap. She's going to speak a bit about innovation programs and how that fits within the decarbonization strategy and roadmap. Obviously, encouraging innovation is a key part of that strategy. And then I'm going to take back over and I'm going to speak specifically about the Innovation On-Ramp program. So provide a general overview of the program, talk a little bit about how the funding is structured, and then go into the evaluation criteria that we'll use to evaluate applicants, and talk about the application process, and then we'll wrap up by fielding questions. So just a couple of quick logistical notes. All attendees will be muted for the duration of the presentation. If you'd like to submit a question, please use the chat function in GoToWebinar. At the end of the webinar, we will read those questions out loud and do our best to respond to them. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted online on Silicon Valley Clean Energy's website. Typically takes us a couple of business days to get the recording cleaned up and up online. But if you wanted to refer back to it or have any colleagues that missed the webinar, you can refer them to that recording once it's up. So with that, I will hand it over to Amy, who's going to talk a bit about the decarb strategy and programs roadmap. Take it away, Amy.
Okay. Thanks, Brian, and thanks to those joining the webinar. So as Brian described, I'll briefly go over some background info before turning it back over to him. And I mainly want to cover our decarb strategy and programs roadmap. So this is SVCE's primary strategic document, which was adopted by our board in December of last year. And the decarb roadmap shown here is effectively our investment thesis in the community. It sets community-wide GHG targets and lays out the specific strategies and implementation steps we're going to pursue to achieve those targets. So if you aren't already familiar with our decarb roadmap and are considering applying to Innovation On-Ramp, I do highly recommend you take a look. There's a tiny URL there. I will be giving a few highlights here, but there's a lot more info in the roadmap itself that we won't be covering. So this chart shows our community's emissions. On the y-axis, we have annual metric tons of CO2, and then on the x-axis is the year. So we have a couple historical emissions years for 2015 and 2017. And then when this graph was created, those were annual forecasts for 2018 through 2030. And as you can see, there are three main contributions to our community's emissions. Electricity, which is in the dark turquoise, natural gas usage from buildings, which is in the orange, and then transportation, which is the very top part of the stack, a light blue. So the 2015 year is before SVCE launched, so that's our baseline year. And since launching, we've significantly reduced emissions in the electricity sector. You'll notice the dark turquoise bar has shrunk pretty significantly, and that's by offering a carbon-free default power product. The two remaining buckets of emissions that are largest at this point are really from natural gas and transportation. And as outlined in the decarb roadmap, the overarching approach that we're following to achieve deep decarbonization includes these three steps: decarbonize electricity, which we're doing with our power supply; electrify everything, including specifically transportation and buildings, such that those end uses then run off clean electricity; and then do that while harnessing cost-effective energy efficiency and maintaining grid integration. So this approach isn't unique to us. This is the broad scientific consensus for how to feasibly achieve deep decarbonization, but we wrote it explicitly in our roadmap, and this is the overarching approach guiding all of our strategies and implementation steps. So the specific program areas identified in the roadmap are shown here, and you'll notice the first four from left to right are straight from that Venn diagram from the last slide, specifically power supply, built environment, mobility, and then energy efficiency and grid integration. And then we have two additional program areas that are cross-sector. One of them is education and outreach, and then innovation. As Brian mentioned in his intro, innovation to SVCE is a very key strategy and a key activity, and that's really a reflection of the community that we're serving, Silicon Valley. So we'll focus on innovation here, of course, in this presentation, and specifically our Innovation On-Ramp program. But just at a high level, the goals of our innovation programs are really to accelerate the innovation that we know is needed in order to achieve our decarb mission. And we think that we can do that best by leveraging our unique position as a community electricity provider based in the global innovation capital. And just one note on what we mean by innovation. I know, often we think of gadgets when we think of innovation, and we certainly love the latest gadgets, love the latest apps, but we are defining innovation to be a bit broader than that. So we're referring also to innovation in data policy and services, broader program policies, education, cross-sector collaboration. So this is not strictly an emerging tech program, since we are defining innovation to be broad. So I also want to call out the last bullet as well. We love to, but we don't necessarily have to be the first entity to do something new. We are in some cases, but in other cases, we could be the partner that can help replicate innovation that has seeded elsewhere to help it achieve scale. So I think that's an important thing to note as well. And just on the subject of scale, kind of related to that, we've structured our innovation activities to really help bring ideas through this pipeline. And so we sponsor and also organize hackathons, for instance, and other types of events, which is very much on the ideation side of things. But Innovation On-Ramp is really focused on prototyping and commercialization. So to carry out proofs of concept and demonstrations to bring those ideas through the commercialization pipeline. So those are the main intro comments that I wanted to cover. I'll turn it back over to Brian now.
Right, thanks, Amy. So with that, we wanted to take a little deeper dive into the Innovation On-Ramp program. So Innovation On-Ramp is designed to provide small grants for innovative decarbonization pilot projects. The way the program is currently set up, we're running on a semi-annual application cycle, meaning the program opens periodically to accept new applications and then closes and goes into an implementation phase for those pilot projects. The program is currently open. The online application is up online and can be completed and submitted through the end of October. And we'll talk a bit more about those deadlines later. The program tries to use a transparent evaluation criteria, and so we're going to talk about that evaluation criteria later on in this presentation. We also aim to use standardized partnership agreements, and these agreements are available online. There is a hardware agreement and a non-hardware agreement, and so we strongly encourage potential applicants to review those agreements. You will be asked in the online application if you accept the terms of those agreements. And what we've found is that really thoroughly reviewing those agreements and making sure that you're okay with them early on can help a lot in the contracting process if you were to move on to become a finalist. We've set a maximum term for the pilot project of 18 months. They can be shorter than that. We just want to make sure that we're looking at projects that are kind of contained in scope and can be implemented relatively quickly to continue moving through that sort of innovation pipeline. We're currently capping the number of pilot projects that will receive grant funding for each cycle at 5. And this is largely due to sort of bandwidth constraints on our end to move the various projects through the contracting process and then to provide ongoing support and program management as those projects go ahead and implement. That may be subject to change during future funding cycles. That is one aspect of the program that we'll look at further down the line. And Innovation On-Ramp grants are provided in two sizes. We have stage 1 grants that are aimed at pilot projects that are really at the proof of concept phase. And these can range anywhere from $10,000 to $75,000. And then we have stage 2 grants that are more for demonstration projects, and those grants are anywhere between $50,000 and $100,000. So like Amy mentioned, we look to move these innovative decarbonization ideas through this sort of development funnel from ideation, things like the hackathons that Amy mentioned, through to the prototype and commercialization phases. And that's kind of how we see Innovation On-Ramp fitting in there, is providing those stage 1 grants to develop that proof of concept, and then moving on to the stage 2 demonstrations. So to talk a little bit about the evaluation criteria, we'll have 5 primary evaluation criteria that we will look at for the applicants. And you'll be asked to respond to each of these evaluation criteria in the online application. These primary evaluation criteria are taken directly from SDCE's decarbonization roadmap. So again, I encourage you to go back and review that roadmap and make sure that the pilot projects that you're proposing are in line with SDCE's strategy. So the first of these evaluation criteria are customer and community value. So that one's fairly straightforward. We want to make sure that any pilot projects are providing value to SDCE's diverse set of customers and communities. The second is that we're looking for innovative ideas that can reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That is core to SDCE's mission. It is why they were created. And so we are looking for pilot projects that can really demonstrate a clear potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Third, the idea here is that we develop ideas that can scale and have broader impact, both within SDCE's service territory and beyond. So, the greenhouse gas problem is not contained to SDCE's service territory. So we will be looking for ideas that are scalable and transferable and can have broader impact beyond this program. The fourth evaluation criteria is one that we call equity in service. And what this means is SDCE has a diverse set of customers, and we want to make sure that these programs serve that diverse customer base. So we'll be looking to see how these different projects address the needs of different customer groups. So your potential solution might be applicable to 1 or 2 customer groups. And really, we're looking at this from a portfolio level and making sure that programs like Innovation On-Ramp are supporting solutions and pilot projects that can benefit all of SDCE's diverse customers. So an individual project won't necessarily be expected to provide benefits to all of SDCE's customers, but we will be looking to see that all of them are served by the portfolio. And then the fifth evaluation criteria is what we call a core role for SDCE. So making sure that the pilot projects sort of fall within the realm, the sphere of influence of SDCE, and that they are clearly related to areas where SDCE has a core role in the community and in the industry. So those are the 5 primary evaluation criteria. We'll also have some secondary evaluation criteria that we'll be looking at, first of which is staff resource impact. So there is sort of limited ability for SDCE and for CSE as an implementation partner to support partners in delivering their pilot projects. We are able to provide some support, but if your pilot project is going to require a high level of support from staff resources, be that from SDCE, that may weigh against your project. So we will be looking to make sure there's not an undue impact on staff resources. The second would be the acceptance of the standard contract terms. And again, that's a field that we'll ask for in the online application. You will be allowed to submit some potential exceptions you have to those standard contract terms, but we are hoping that those partnership agreements can be agreed upon, and that can kind of fast track the contracting process and not get into a drawn out negotiation. And then the final secondary criteria that we're looking at is any co-funding. So any additional funding that you can leverage to bring to this project that will, help enhance the project and help make it more scalable will factor into the decision. And we do ask for that as well in the online application. And then finally, for Innovation Onramp, SBCE may determine some key focus areas for specific application cycles. And for the fall 2019 application cycle that we're in right now, innovative mobility solutions has been identified as a key focus area. So some potential areas of interest here, and this is not an exhaustive list, but projects that look at education and awareness of electric vehicles and the benefits of adopting electric vehicles could fall within this. Anything that's aimed at aiding customers in deciding to adopt an electric vehicle, removing those barriers to adoption could fall under these projects. Projects that help low-income customers or renters or tenants in multi-unit dwellings to access electric vehicles. Obviously, home charging is a big issue for a lot of the people in these categories. Those would be in line with the types of projects that we're looking for. And then the last point there is ideas sort of maybe unrelated necessarily to electric vehicles, but mode shifting, changing forms of transportation that are used. And again, that is not an exhaustive list, so feel free to go beyond those bullet points in the types of solutions that you propose. And one final note is that mobility is a focus for this round, but we will still consider applications for other sectors. So it is entirely possible that if you have a very strong application that's not related to mobility, you will still be selected. So we do still encourage you to submit your application, even if it's not necessarily mobility focused. Some other considerations and notes that we'd like to mention. So we will be looking for alignment with SBCE activities across the program's portfolio. So we do encourage all applicants to familiarize themselves with SBCE's programs. Make sure that the pilot that you're proposing are in alignment with the program portfolio. And specific for this solicitation cycle, we would encourage you to review the recently released EV Infrastructure Joint Action Plan and make sure that any mobility-focused pilot projects are in line with that joint action plan. Another important consideration is that, the idea here is that we support innovative pilot projects and then we share those lessons learned so that they can have broader impact. So we don't want to incentivize any projects that have secret results. We do understand that a lot of the folks applying here will have trade secrets and intellectual property that won't necessarily be shared, but the results of these projects we do want to share widely so that we can scale that impact. Any projects that are going to be dealing with customer data, obviously IT security and privacy are a big concern here. So we do have a section on the online application that will allow you to address how you'll handle customer data if that is an integral part of your pilot project. And then the last note is that the pilot project will have some sort of EM&V component that goes with them. Some of these may be subject to EM&V with a third-party contractor that SBCE has brought on to conduct EM&V for their programs, or it may simply be at the level of the pilot project and not with that third-party contractor, but there will be some sort of EM&V component with the pilot project. So the application process, like I've mentioned, it'll be through an online application. The link here goes to that online application that is also available on SBCE's Innovation Onramp website. Applications are due by 5 p.m. on November 1st, 2019, so in about 3 weeks. We have provided a Word document along with the online application. So that'll allow you to download the application. It essentially mirrors the online application, which is through a Google form. But the online application will not allow you to save your progress. So with the Word doc, you can work on the application offline, finalize your submittal, and then just copy and paste that into the Google form. We will not accept applications via email. So even if you complete your application in the Word document, please do make sure to complete and submit the actual online application. You'll also be asked to upload a PDF of a completed logic model. There will be a field for that in your online application. So if you're unfamiliar with developing logic models, there is some guidance provided on the application page and an example logic model that you can use. And any questions about the application process or developing logic models or things like that, feel free to email innovation@svcleanenergy.org, and we will do our best to respond to your questions in a timely manner. So next steps, like I mentioned, the application deadline will be 5 p.m. on November 1st. Once the program closes for new applications, we'll go into our review and finalist selection process. We anticipate that that'll take about a month. That'll depend on the volume of projects that we receive. But the review and selection process will likely include potentially a pre-screen call with applicants and then an interview before selecting the finalists. Once we've selected the finalists, then we move into the contracting phase, which we realize is falling over the holiday period, which can be challenging for folks. We're hoping that we can get through contracting in around 2 months, so through December, January, and then ideally launching the next cohort of pilot projects beginning in February. And again, reviewing those standard partnership agreements in advance, making sure you're comfortable with them, will really help streamline that contracting process if you move on to the finalist stage. So just to kind of wrap up, a couple of disclaimers is this is a relatively young program, and so we do expect it to change and ideally improve as we move forward. And so we do welcome feedback from applicants, participants on ways in which we might be able to improve the program. So with that, I thank everyone for attending the webinar, and we will open it up now to questions. It looks like we do have a few questions in the queue already, and if you have a question that you'd like to submit, please do use the chat function. So I'm just going to read these questions out, and then either myself or Amy will attempt to respond to them. So the first question is about timeline. We may have already addressed this. So what is the timeline of the project? Is there a kickoff date for the projects to start? Can the project start earlier than January 2020? Or at least the preparation and design part. So my answer there would be, the projects can kick off as soon as contracting has been completed. So if we're able to move quickly through that contracting process, then yeah, a January kickoff would certainly be possible. On your end, if there's legwork that you want to do in preparation and program design, hopefully some of that's already been done in the application process. And so hopefully you do have a sort of fully baked program design, pilot project design that you can go and launch relatively quickly. Obviously, expenses incurred prior to entering into contract wouldn't necessarily be eligible. So that would be one thing to be aware of. And Amy, please feel free to jump in if you have anything you'd like to add to these responses. The next question is about service territory. So Amy, you're probably better placed to answer this one. Regarding the cities that are SVCE members and that could potentially host the demo or proof of concept, do you prefer the applicant to directly reach out to them to present them our concept and propose them to host the test, or do you prefer to keep the lead on it, presenting them applicant ideas directly?
So I think it depends on what the idea is and what the role of the city is, or a customer, for instance. I would say, just generally speaking, for the secondary evaluation criteria, staff resource impact is a big one. And so if there is a proposal that involves bringing key partners on board, then that's going to limit the viability of the proposal potentially. And so I feel like it probably depends a lot on what the role of the city is and what the role of SVCE is, but could potentially go either way. But largely speaking, we'd want the proposers to bring all the partners to the table.
Great, thanks, Amy. Next question is, apart from the funding, what other support is bundled with this program? Networking, coaching, for example. So apart from the funding, part of CFE's role is to provide program management support. So, we will be there to support with refining the scope of work of the project, the approach, implementation timeline, and milestones tracking and things like that. We'll draw upon our resources to help troubleshoot problems that might arise, and SVCE is available as well to help troubleshoot issues like that. I think that gets back to the staff resource impact that we were talking about earlier, where we're here to try to help these projects be successful, but we're not here to implement necessarily. So if there are areas where, for example, networking, where you think you're going to need support in making the right connections, that may be within the remit of what the support that we're able to provide, and we would just ask that you detail that very clearly in your application so that we can evaluate what those impacts might be. So the next question, can you apply for stage 2 funding if you haven't received stage 1 funding in the past? And so this is a relatively new program. My understanding, and Amy, please correct me if I'm wrong, is that yes, you can apply for a stage 2 grant if that is where your technology is at, if you're more at the demonstration stage and past proof of concept. Amy, is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. And likewise, I think the idea here too is that ideally, stage 1 projects receiving stage 1 funding would be successful, and then ideally in the future move on to a stage 2 grant. I think that's the idea with the program, is to foster that development.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Next question, would SVCE consider a project that combines elements of proof of concept and demonstration? If so, what would be the maximum award allowed? Perhaps $175,000. So that would be sort of combining both into one. Amy, do you want to handle that question?
So I think another way to phrase it could be, you could submit 2 proposals. So you could submit a proposal that's specifically at a proof of concept stage and within the funding guardrails that are given, and then you could submit a second proposal that's in a demonstration phase. For none of the contracts do we anticipate a contract being over $100K for these, and I think, yeah, so that would be my suggestion.
Okay. And if you have more questions on that, please do feel free to follow up after the webinar. The next question is, for an education-focused proposal, could we assume SVCE's collaboration on outreach activities? Amy, do you want to, I guess it's the staff resources impact.
Right. So it definitely gets at the staff resource impact. So I think in the application, there's a section that outlines what is the proposed role of SVCE and also all of the other project partners. And so you would need to describe exactly what you would be expecting of us as a part of this proposal. I think there is the potential for us to, participate in outreach activities. It kind of depends on the level of involvement that you would be needing, I think, in the proposal.
Okay. Next question is, can you elaborate a bit more on what the differences are with the two stages between the stage 1 proof of concept and stage 2 demonstration?
So in this case, it's, sorry, the question was to elaborate more on the difference?
Yeah, the difference between stage 1 and stage 2.
Right, and so if we go back to the slide that shows kind of ideation through to prototype, through to commercialization, the proof of concept in this case, if it's an idea that hasn't been tried before and it's not a commercialized product, then that would be the stage 1. If it's something that already exists and is even commercialized, but it's more kind of about creating different case studies of that technology or of that product or service, then it would fall more under the demonstration category. And happy to answer, provide more of a response if you reach out by email, if helpful.
Great. The last question that we have in the queue here then is the number of applications or project proposals limited per company?
No.
Right. So that brings us to the end of our question queue. We'll give a last couple seconds here for anyone else if you have any last-minute questions to get them in. If not, then we thank everyone for taking the time to attend this webinar. We look forward to seeing your proposals and seeing some really innovative decarbonization ideas, and look forward to helping to implement these projects with you all. So again, these slides will be posted. They should be online in a few days on SBCE's website. And any questions that you have as you work through the online application, feel free to reach out, and we will do our best to respond to those questions. So if there aren't any more questions, and I don't see any more in the queue, then we will wrap up. And thank you all, and have a good afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.